Welcome to Storytime with Nanny. This is day 23, and we are still in Paths to Adventure. We're going to, which is an Abeka book. We're going to start with a story called Messy Melvin. Let's see who wrote this one. Cookie Lambert Alster. Once upon a time, there was a little monkey named Melvin. Melvin was a marvelous little monkey, except for one small matter. Melvin was extremely messy. The other monkeys for miles around, from Maine to Mexico, had heard of Melvin's messes. Melvin's mother, mild-mannered Melvina, was not a messy monkey at all. She would ask Melvin, "Would you please stop making so many messes?" Meanwhile, Melvin's room was so messy it even smelled messy. In one corner of his room was Melvin's swimming mask, in the second corner was his musty mansion, in the third corner was his magic markers, and in the fourth corner were muddy mittens. Much of the time, Melvin would take food into his room, and this bad habit made many, many more monstrous messes. If you had been there in Melvin's messy room, you could have been a mound of moldy You could have seen a mound of moldy mushrooms, old mulberry muffins with marmalade, melted marshmallows, milky macaroons, and macaroni that had multiplied into a multitude. In fact, Melvin's room was so messy that even the mice moved out. That's pretty bad. One day, Melvin's mother marched into his messy room. Mrs. Malvina's mood had moved from mild to mad. She said kindly but very firmly, "Little mister." She always called him little mister when she was mad. "No more messes until you clean up this mess. I will cook no more meals. I will show no mercy until this mess is missing." Somehow Melvin knew that his mother was not kidding. So he very submissively muttered, "Yes, ma'am." Mother marched out just as she had marched in. Melvin looked at the enormous mess. He looked in the mirror and finally saw himself as he really was, the messiest monkey this side of the moon. He knew that he must finally clean his messy room. Melvin was miserable. Melvin mumbled to himself, "I could starve to death before I get this mammoth mess cleaned up. What is the matter with me? It is a mystery to me how I could manage to make a mess like this all by myself." Then he remembered what his grandfather Malcolm used to tell all the monkey members of the family: "A mess by the yard is hard, but a mess by the inch is a cinch." So Messy Melvin began picking up the mess, one messy thing at a time. Melvin's muscles moved like a magnificent mess-moving machine. As if drawn by a magnet, Melvin moved the swimming mask, the musty mansion, the magic markers, and the muddy mittens to the middle shelf of the closet, the mound of moldy mushrooms, the mulberry muffins with marmalade, the melted marshmallows, the milky macaroons, and the mountain of macaroni finally made it to the trash can. Melvin made his bed. Then Melvin looked around the room. It was a major miracle. His room was messy no more. Melvin was not miserable now, but his mood was much merrier. He wanted his mother to see the transformation. "Mother, mother, come up here to my room, and please come quickly," Melvin called, motioning with his hand. Mrs. Malvina moved quickly up the steps. She stared in amazement at what met her unbelieving eyes. There before her was a sight her eyes had never before seen. Melvin's room was not messy. It was actually clean. It was so clean that she would have needed a magnifier to see one bit of a crumb. She was so proud of Melvin that she had to give the message to her minister. Mrs. Malvina called the minister and told him that a miracle had happened. Melvin was no longer messy. He had moved the mountain of mess. The minister reminded Mrs. Malvina of something that she had read in the Bible. If she had enough faith, she could move mountains, and Melvin's mountain of mess had now been moved. Mrs. Malvina's mood was no longer mad but marvelous. Waiting to celebrate, she mentioned to Melvin, "Let's go to the mall and do something fun." Melvin's mother's mood was music to his ears. Melvin moved toward his mother to give her a big hug. As Melvin and his mother sipped mugs of moco and munched on mangoes, Malvina said proudly to Melvin, "I will give you a medal for being a model monkey if you will keep your room clean." "A medal? Mom, a medal? You will really give me a medal for keeping my room clean?" Melvin asked, unbelieving. "To this very day, if you see a monkey wearing a medal that says model monkey, you will know that you have seen the little monkey that used to be named Messy Melvin." Well, it got pretty bad, didn't it? Melvin's room, that was a mess. But he got it taken care of. He didn't try to do it all at once. You couldn't clean up that mess all at once. He had to do it little by little by little. And he got it all taken care of and all cleaned up. Let's see. This one is called The Discontented Pig. And where it adapted by Mary Entwistle, Entwistle. There was once a curly-tailed pig who lived in a little house by himself, and every day he worked in the garden. He lived and dug and weeded whether the sun shone or the rain fell. Each year he won the royal prize at the fair, and word of his fine vegetable garden traveled all through the 7 countries. But at last the little pig grew tired of his endless toil. What matters it if I do have the finest vegetables in 7 kingdoms, he thought, since I must work to death to make them grow. I will go out and see the world and find an easier way of living. So he locked the door of his house and shut the gate of his garden and started down the road. On he traveled a good 3 miles till he came to a cottage almost hidden in a grove of trees. Lovely music sounded around him, and Little Pig smiled, for he had an ear for sweet sounds. "I will go and look for it," he said, and he ran in the direction from which the music came. Now in that house lived Thomas the cat, who made his living by playing on the violin. Little Pig saw him standing in the door pushing the bow and up and down across the strings. Surely, he thought, this must be an easy way of earning a living. "Will you teach me to play the violin, friend Thomas?" he asked. Thomas nodded his head. "To be sure," he said, "just do what I'm doing," and he gave him the bow and the fiddle. Little Pig took them and began to move the bow, but squeak, quang, no sweet music fell upon his ear. The sounds he made were like the squeaking of his baby brother when a wolf came near them. "Oh," he cried, "this isn't music." Thomas shook his head. "Of course not," he said. "You haven't tried long enough. He who would play the violin must work." "Then I think I'll look for something else," Little Pig answered, "because this is quite as hard as weeding my garden." He gave back the bow and the fiddle to Thomas the cat and started again on his journey. He walked on and on until he came to a hut where lived a dog who made cheese. He was kneading and molding the curd into round cheese, and Little Pig thought it looked quite easy. "I think I'd like to go into the cheese business," he said to himself. "Will you teach me, Mr. Dog?" he asked. "Certainly," said the dog. In a moment Little Pig was working beside him. Soon Little Pig grew hot and stopped to fan himself. "No, no," exclaimed the dog, "do not stop. You will spoil the cheese. There can be no rest till the work is done." "Indeed," cried Little Pig, "this cheese making is quite as hard as growing vegetables or learning to play the violin. I want to look for something easier." And he started off down the road. On the other side of the river, in a green field, a man was taking honey out of beehives. Little Pig saw him as he was crossing the bridge. "Of all the trades I have seen, this would suit me best," he thought. "It would be lovely among the flowers, and honey is not heavy to lift. Once in a while he might take a mouthful of it." So he ran to the man and asked him if he would employ him. "I've been looking for a helper," said the bee man. "For a year and a day I've been looking, but you can begin work at once." He gave Little Pig a veil and a pair of gloves to protect himself from the bees. Then he told Little Pig to lift a honeycomb out of a hive. Little Pig ran to do it, twisting his curly tail for gladness. He was so pleased to have found such a nice business, but oh dear, the bees crept under his veil and inside his gloves. They stung him on his fingers, his nose, and his ears. Little Pig squealed, dropped the honey, and ran out of the field. Come back, cried the bee man. "No, no," Little Pig squealed, "no, no, the bees hurt me." The bee man nodded his head. "Of course they do. They hurt me often. That is part of the work. You cannot be a beekeeper without getting stung." Little Pig blinked his black beady eyes, sat down, and began to think hard. "It seems there isn't any kind of work that is pleasant and easy all day long. To play the violin you must practice until your arms ache. When you make cheese you dare not stop a minute, however tired you are, until the work is done. And in taking honey from the hive, the bees sting until your head is on fire. Work in my garden is not so bad after all. And I am going back to it at once." So he said goodbye to the bee man and was soon back in the garden among his vegetables. He planted and raked and worked, and there was no more contented pig in the 7 kingdoms. Every autumn he took his vegetables to the fair, brought home the royal prize, and sometimes on holidays the cat and the dog and the bee man came to have tea with him. Well, it's cool he met some new friends, didn't he, that he wouldn't have met otherwise. But he learned his job. Even though it was hard work, it suited him best. So he went back to what he was already doing, didn't he? And this is a poem by Mary H. Howliston, and it's called Our Country's Flag. "There are many flags in many lands, there are flags of every hue, but there is no flag, however grand, like our own red, white, and blue. We shall always love the stars and stripes, and we mean to be ever true to this land of ours and the dear old flag, the red, the white, and the blue. Then hooray for the flag, our country's flag, its stripes and white stars too. There is no flag in any land like our own red, white, and blue." Of course, that is about our country's flag. Something to be proud of. I can't believe I almost missed this one. And I did lose my place on one of them. Now that's a bother. And in a minute you'll see. I wonder what in the world. I wonder if it was that one. Goodness. Maybe I'll come across it. But yes, I almost missed this, and I love this story. Well, all of the stories from this author. Pooh goes visiting and gets into a tight place. And it's from Winnie the Pooh, of course. And he likes to say, "Oh bother," doesn't he? And I wanted to, because off the top of my head I can't remember. It is, okay, A.A. Milne is the author of this. And Pooh goes visiting and gets into a tight place. Edward Bear, known to his friends as Winnie the Pooh, or Pooh for short, was walking through the forest one day, humming proudly to himself. He had made up a little hum that very morning as he was doing his stoutness exercises in front of the glass. Tra-la-la, tra-la-la, as he stretched up as high as he could go, and then tra-la-la, oh help, la, as he tried to reach his toes. After breakfast he had said it over and over to himself until he had learned it off by heart, and now he was humming it right through properly. It went like this: tra-la-la, tra-la-la, rum-tum diddle-tum, diddle-iddle, tiddle-iddle, 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 rum-tum-tum, tiddle-um. Well, he was humming this hum to himself and walking along gaily, wondering what everybody else was doing and what it felt like being somebody else, when suddenly he came to a sandy bank, and in the bank was a large hole. "Aha," said Pooh, rum-tum-tiddle-tum. "If I know anything about anything, that hole means rabbit," he said, "and rabbit means company," he said, "and company means food, and listening to me humming, and such like, rum-tum-tum-tiddle-um." So he bent down, put his head into the hole, and called out, "Is anybody at home?" There was a sudden scuffling noise from inside the hole, and then silence. "Well, I said was, is anybody at home?" called out Pooh very loudly. "No," said a voice, and then added, "You needn't shout so loud. I heard you quite well the first time." "Bother," said Pooh. "Isn't there anybody here at all? Nobody?" Winnie the Pooh took his head out of the hole and thought for a little. He thought to himself, there must be somebody there, because somebody must have said nobody. So he put his head back in the hole and said, "Hello, Rabbit, isn't that you?" "No," said Rabbit, in a different sort of voice this time. "But isn't that Rabbit's voice?" "I don't think so," said Rabbit. "It isn't meant to be." "Oh," said Pooh. He took his head out of the hole and had another think, and then he put it back and said, "Well, could you very kindly tell me where Rabbit is?" "He has gone to see his friend Pooh Bear, who is a great friend of his." "But this is me," said Bear, very much surprised. "What sort of me, Pooh Bear? Are you sure?" said Rabbit, still more surprised. Quite sure," said Pooh. "Oh, well then, come in." So Pooh pushed and pushed and pushed his way through the hole, and at last he got in. "You weren't quite right," said Rabbit, looking at him all over. "It is you." "You were quite right," said Rabbit, looking at him all over. "It is you. Glad to see you." "Who did you think it was?" "Well, I wasn't sure. You know how it is in the forest. One can't have anybody coming up into one's house. One has to be careful." "What about a mouthful of something?" Pooh always liked a little something at 11 o'clock in the morning, and he was very glad to see Rabbit getting out the plates and mugs. And when Rabbit said honey or condensed milk with your bread, he was so excited that he said both. And then, so as not to seem greedy, he added, "Don't bother about the bread, please." And for a long time after that he said nothing, until at last, humming to himself in a rather sticky voice, he got up, shook Rabbit lovingly by the paw, and said that he must be going on. "Must you?" said Rabbit politely. "Well," said Pooh, "I could stay a little while longer if you—" and he tried very hard to look in the direction of the larder. "As a matter of fact," said Rabbit, "I was going out myself directly." "Oh, well then, I'll be going on. Goodbye." "Well, goodbye, if you're sure you won't have any more." "Is there any more?" asked Pooh quickly. Rabbit took the covers off the dishes and said no, there wasn't. "I thought not," said Pooh, nodding to himself. "Well, goodbye, I must be going on." So he started to climb out of the hole. He pulled with his front paws and pushed with his back paws, and in a little while his nose was out in the open again, and then his ears, and then his front paws, and then his shoulders, and then, "Oh, help," said Pooh. "I'd better go back." "Oh, bother," said Pooh. "I shall have to go on." "I can't do either," said Pooh. "Oh, help and bother." Now by this time Rabbit wanted to go for a walk too, and finding the front door full, he went out of the back door and came around to Pooh and looked at him. "Hello, are you stuck?" he asked. "No," said Pooh carelessly, "just resting and thinking and humming to myself." "Here, give us a paw," Pooh Bear stretched out a paw, and Rabbit pulled and pulled and pulled. "Ow!" cried Pooh, "you're hurting." "The fact is," said Rabbit, "you're stuck. It all comes," said Pooh crossly, "of not having front doors big enough." "It all comes," said Rabbit sternly, "of eating too much." I thought at the time, said Rabbit, only I didn't like to say anything, said Rabbit, that one of us was eating too much, said Rabbit, and I knew it wasn't me. Well, well, I shall go and fetch Christopher Robin. Christopher Robin lived at the other end of the forest, and when he came back with Rabbit, he saw the front half of Pooh. He said, "Silly old bear," in such a loving voice that everybody felt quite hopeful again. "I was just beginning to think," said Bear, sniffling slightly, "that Rabbit might never be able to use his front door again. And I should hate that," he said. "So should I," said Rabbit. "Use his front door again?" said Christopher Robin. "Of course he'll use his front door again." "Good," said Rabbit. If we can't pull you out, Pooh, we might push you back." Rabbit scratched his whiskers thoughtfully and pointed out that when once Pooh was pushed back, he was back. And of course nobody was more glad to see Pooh than he was. Still, there it was. Some lived in trees and some lived underground, and "You mean I'd never get out?" said Pooh. "I mean," said Rabbit, "that having got so far, it seems a pity to waste it." Christopher Robin nodded. "Then there's only one thing to be done," he said. "We shall have to wait for you to get thin again." "How long does getting thin take?" asked Pooh anxiously. "About a week, I should think." "But I can't stay here for a week." "You can stay here all right, silly old bear. It's getting you out which is so difficult." "Well, we'll read to you," said Rabbit cheerfully. "And I hope it won't snow," he added. "And I say, old fellow, you're taking up a good deal of room in my house. Do you mind if I use your back legs as a towel horse? Because, I mean, there they are, doing nothing, and it would be very convenient just to hang the towels on them." "A week?" said Pooh gloomily. "What about meals?" "I'm afraid no meals," said Christopher Robin, "because of getting thin quicker. But we will read to you." Bear began to sigh, and then found that he couldn't because he was so tightly stuck, and a tear rolled down his eye as he said, "Then would you read a sustaining book, such as would help and comfort a wedged bear in great tightness?" So for a week Christopher Robin read that sort of book at the north end of Pooh, and Rabbit hung his washing on the south end, and in between Bear felt himself getting slenderer and slenderer, and at the end of the week Christopher Robin said, "Now." So he took hold of Pooh's front paws, and Rabbit took hold of Christopher Robin, and all Rabbit's friends and relations took hold of Rabbit, and they all pulled together. And for a long time Pooh only said "ow" and "oh," and then all of a sudden he said "pop," just as if a cork were coming out of a bottle. And Christopher Robin and Rabbit and all of Rabbit's friends and relations went head over heels backwards, and on the top of them came Winnie the Pooh free. So with a nod of thanks to his friends, he went on with his walk through the forest, humming proudly to himself. But Christopher Robin looked after him lovingly and said to himself, "Silly old bear." I always loved Winnie the Pooh, but now, in real life, we can't go a week without eating, but that's what Pooh had to do, because he's full of fluff, he's just a stuffed bear. So he could get out of Rabbit's house. This next story is called Sir Walter Raleigh. Let's see who wrote this. Retold by James Baldwin. There once lived in England a brave and noble man whose name was Walter Raleigh. He was not only brave and noble, but he was also handsome and polite, and for that reason the Queen made him a knight and called him Sir Walter Raleigh. I will tell you about it. When Raleigh was a young man, he was one day walking along a street in London. At that time, the streets were not paved, and there were no sidewalks. Raleigh was dressed in very fine style, and he wore a beautiful scarlet cloak thrown over his shoulders. As he passed along, he found it hard work to keep from stepping in the mud and soiling his handsome new shoes. Soon he came to a puddle of muddy water which reached from one side of the street to the other. He could not step across. Perhaps he could jump over it. As he was thinking what he should do, he happened to look up. Who was it coming down the street on the other side of the puddle? It was Elizabeth, the Queen of England, with her train of gentlewomen and waiting maids. She saw the dirty puddle in the street. She saw the handsome young man with the scarlet cloak standing by the side of it. How was she to get across? Young Raleigh, when he saw who was coming, forgot about himself. He thought only of helping the Queen. There was only one thing that he could do, and no other man would have thought of that. He took off his scarlet cloak and spread it across the puddle. The queen could step on it now on a beautiful carpet. She walked across. She was safely over the ugly puddle, and her feet had not touched the mud. She paused a moment and thanked the young man. As she walked onward with her train, she asked one of the gentlewomen, "Who is the bravest gentleman who helped us so handsomely?" "His name is Walter Raleigh," said the gentlewoman. "He shall have his reward," said the queen. Not long after that, she sent for Raleigh to come to her palace. The young man went, but he had no scarlet cloak to wear. Then, while all the great men and fine ladies of England stood around, the queen made him a knight. And from that time, he was known as Sir Walter Raleigh, the queen's favorite. He did a good act, didn't he? He did a sweet deed for the queen. He got rewarded for it. And we're supposed to do the right thing even if, and not expect a reward, because that's just what we're supposed to do. It's the right thing to do. And I don't see where that would have fallen out from, because I don't see any other stories in our past to adventure. But I do have another book that we should have time to read. It's one of mine. It's been around a little while. It is called The Giant's Shoe. It's by Jessica Nelson North, and it's illustrated by Esther Friend. It's a cool last name, isn't it? There was an old woman who lived in a house, and the house fell down on her head. She took her 12 children up under her arms and went to live in a shed. The wind blew up, and the shed blew down, and the children blew far and wide. "Let us go and live in the haystack now," the cheerful woman cried. They lived in the haystack very well, 6 boys, 6 girls, and the mother, till the hungry cows ate up their house, and they had to find another. "We will live in a box by the side of the road," and this they proceeded to do, till a bonfire came and burned their box, and they said, "Let us live in a shoe." But the shoes were too small, and the heels were too tall, and the toes were far too tight, and they slept outdoors for weeks and weeks before they found one that was right. A shoe so right, so roomy and bright, it surely couldn't be true. They made their kitchen in the heel and slept in the toe of the shoe. They slept in the toe where the wind couldn't blow, 6 boys and 6 girls in their beds, and out of the holes where the lacings go, they stuck their wee little heads. But every day the old woman would say, as she dusted and swept her floor, "If the giant comes who wore this shoe, it won't be our house anymore." The children played and were not afraid while their mother dusted and swept, but a giant high with his head in the sky came by while the family slept. "Why, here is my poor old shoe," said he, "that I lost a year ago." He picked it up, and the children rolled from their 12 little beds in the toe. "We must lie very still, so that none of us spill," said the mother, "whatever we do." The giant heard not even a word as he started home with his shoe. 6 boys, 6 girls, the mother and all, they came to the giant's street. "I will put on my good old shoes," said he, "to comfort my poor old feet." 6 boys, 6 girls, the mother and all, lay still in the toe of the house. The giant put in his foot and cried, "A mouse, a terrible mouse." He ran away in a torrent of tears, and he never came back there, never. And the old woman said, "We will live here, my dears, forever and ever and ever." That was just a cute little book, but I always liked that story. He thought that was a mice in his shoe, but it actually wasn't it? It was the wee little people, and he was a giant, so yeah, that was very scary for him. But they got to live in the shoe because they scared him away, even though they didn't mean to. Well, thank you for joining Storytime with Nanny, and I hope you come again and have a great, blessed day.